Okay, what kind of videos do people want to see from this channel? I need bright ideas, gentlemen. Alright, so I've been thinking. Check it. Call of Duty. No, we've tried that before, but they really only seem to like cartoon characters they can draw porn of.
Oh, how about Mario?
Yeah, but he's not all that fast. Not to mention, people don't think he's that hot. I've got it!
Sonic's girlfriend! Another stupid throwback game that nobody really watches? Sorry, that was a low blow.
No, none of that! A video on Uncharted! Being diagnosed with COVID-19 a few weeks ago, I had to go into quarantine, and on my way home from that test, I was honestly dreading what the next 10 days would be like. I was told that I would have to stay locked in my room with no hope of leaving save for a bathroom break. And since I'm already dealing with congenital heart disease, I would have to monitor my breathing to make sure I don't need to stay at the hospital. Thankfully, I didn't get it as badly as I could have, so I basically spent my quarantine living it up with no responsibilities to speak of. I watched the entirety of The Legend of Korra, played some Genshin, and got to some of my gaming backlog, mainly the first 3 Uncharted games. This has been something I've been trying to find time to do for a while now. And after playing through them all within the span of about 2 days, I have to wonder, why does everyone hold these games in such high regard? I mean, don't get me wrong, they're great and all, but I can't help but feel like they're all kind of underwhelming experiences. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing the same game even after the credits rolled.
That's not true, you asshole.
I should make it clear that the first Naughty Dog game I ever played was The Last of Us Remastered. And while I thought the game was mechanically a little shallow, I still enjoyed the narrative. Joel and Ellie are great characters that have plenty of time given to their relationship. The goal throughout the game is constant: get Ellie to the Fireflies. I have played part 2, but I won't be speaking on its story because I don't think it's as relevant, and I also don't want an angry mob in the comments. Now, over in Uncharted, I never really connect with any of the characters on screen, and I wouldn't even say it's because any of them are badly written or anything. I would wager it's because we don't get enough time to really know them. After spending a nearly consecutive 24-ish hours controlling Nathan Drake, I don't think I could tell you anything about this guy other than he's lucky, he's got a good heart, he's sarcastic, he's a history nerd. There's never really any prolonged character building moments to speak of. There are some cute little moments like when Nate bumps his noggin, but nothing that lasts long enough for us to get a good feel of any of these characters or their motivations. Now, I think the third game got the closest to this, but it still fell short. Drake's deception starts the game out making you think it's going to be a journey all about Nate and his best friend / mentor, Sully. It shows us how they met, the lengths they would go to for each other, and the father-son bond they've developed, but kinda not really. That's what I thought the game was going to really lean on, but it doesn't take advantage of this momentum at all. We know from the other 2 games that Nate and Sully are best friends, but we know nothing of the how or the why. It would rather take the prequel route and flat out tell us that they're friends.
Like that time you got us lost in Peru?
Since we fell into that nest of gun dogs.
Oh, you really want to bring up Peru? I was 15, Sully.
You fell into that nightmare, Master, and I rescued you, remember?
Should have known when I met you that I'd be in prison within a year.
Yes.
You were headed that way all on your own, if you recall.
You're sweating.
The beginning chapters give us a glimpse of how they came to know each other. Sully was working for this evil lady and potentially doing some overtime. But he saves Nathan and gives him a hot meal, and just when I think we're going to get some nice character development, we start talking about history stuff that, again, I and every other member of the audience has no interest in.
Just pretend for a minute that I don't really care about any of that stuff and cut to the chase, would you?
Like, don't you think it would have made the situation a bit more compelling if Sully had been a little torn when this evil lady is dying? Maybe plant the seeds of these two having a connection of some sorts early on. The game sure doesn't think so because Sully instead looks like, "Come on, kid, let that bitch die!" It always feels like these games are way more interested in the MacGuffin hunt rather than letting our central characters interact with each other. There is always just enough context for the motivations, but never an amount that's really satisfying. We get a little bit of history on Nate with a few lines in the third game, but nothing more. I want to know more. What is the deal with Sully and this evil chick? Is there any chance that she's got a good side to her? Could Sully choose between his greatest friend and the only woman he's ever loved, maybe? No, they don't share words after that first meetup 20 minutes in. That stuff doesn't matter. The real task at hand is finding the entrance to the Sacred Wizard Library or whatever. The villains just don't have any dimensions at all. They are all, and I mean all of them, paper thin. And it gets old fast. The evil guy who speaks Spanish wants to have power. The evil guy who speaks Russian wants to have power. The evil lady who speaks British just wants to have power. It got old. I cared nothing for the villains because they were all the same character. The second game had Chloe, who was a bit of a wild card, but she was pretty decidedly a good guy after an hour-and-a-half mark when she bonked some nogs to save Nate and Sully. And then she's permanently a part of Team History Class After Dark. And don't even get me started on this schmo. I saw this dude's betrayal coming the moment he stepped into frame for the first time. And this guy in the third game, what a John Doe. I remember nothing about this dude besides he's the right-hand man. You know what? That's the main issue here. The villains just don't have any clear motivations. Power is not a good, clear motivation. Why do they want this power? What caused them to have this drive? Why do they need it? Especially when they all have literal armies to command. Why does this guy need to turn people into zombies? I can see why you want immortality, but it's weak. You're just Frieza at that point. And this lady wants to make people hallucinate?
What?
Unless I'm missing a big chunk from these stories, the villains' motivations are just sorely lacking. And again, I can't really say it's much better for our heroes. It is, slightly, but I really would have liked more. Not the kind of more that they also just stuck onto the gameplay itself for each entry. The Uncharted series are third-person shooter adventure games through and through, but it also adopts some, and I say this in the loosest way possible, platforming segments. This and Assassin's Creed were the instigators of the homogenized climbing mechanics we see in almost every game these days, but I won't give it too much flack here because it does incorporate in more meaningful ways further we go. As each game comes and goes, there are more little mechanics added to the climbing, but it's nothing that rocks the foundation or anything. It works as you would expect the whole way through. Sometimes it can be a little tough to pick out where to jump, but it's nothing you can't find after a death or two. It's one more thing you just have to trial and error until you get finished with it. Again, it gets points for being relatively early in the popularization of climbing in games, but it's still a pretty boring system. Especially when you make the wrong jump or miss the jump and your checkpoint is at the beginning of the gauntlet. Seeing as how these games are linear point A to point B affairs, the climbing really loses its charm by the second go around. After seeing the 50th pole break after you jump to it or the 100th brick crumble away after you grab it, you kinda wonder if that's all this series has when it comes to climbing up the same yellow ledge. And it gets worse in these vehicle segments. The jet ski section in the first game can seriously fuck off. The amount of trial and error here is obnoxious. I expected this to be a fast-paced escape sequence where you're dodging all these explosives and gunfire, but if you try that then you'll be dead quick, fast, and in a hurry. Instead, you have to slowly inch your way around these turns and make sure you kill all the enemies along the way. And with the combo of slippery controls and a low health pool, you can bet your boating license you'll be wasting a lot of time here. Again, it's just trial and error. It's the same thing with all these sections where you'll have to jump from one vehicle to the other. If you miss the super specific thing you're supposed to do in these vehicle sections, you die. And it's back to the checkpoint. So it just
Waste my motherfucking time!
The climbing is at its best when it's accompanied by these big, linear, bombastic set pieces that make it clear where you're supposed to jump. The train from 2, the sinking boat from 3, and the helicopter chase from 2 are all particular highlights. Now, the bread and butter here is cover-based gunfights. You can loot enemy bodies, or search around the battlefields for high-powered weapons that do reward curious players. The first game has it really rough when it comes to gunfights. The weapons you can find are still relatively basic, and you don't have any interesting melee moves yet, along with there being no stealth system yet. Gunfights always take place in very mundane arenas and end up boring me to sleep, but I should admit, I'm not the biggest fan of third-person shooters anyway, so it makes me even more irritable when the cover system is so finicky. In all 3 games, it can be difficult to get behind cover and stay in cover during an intense gunfight. It always feels like a gamble when I have to switch cover while taking heavy fire. and I hated having to maneuver around explosive using enemies that can force you out of cover. This second game introduces new guns like the Pistole, a personal favorite, but again, nothing that really changes the game. A new quick kill mechanic was added if you can get the drop on enemies, and the counter system isn't much, but it keeps me engaged when in beatdown mode. But I really think they took it too far in the third game. Yeah, more guns and stuff like that are great, but getting up close and personal is a lot more cumbersome now. If you're like me and enjoy using your melee attacks as much as possible, it becomes very clear that the game really didn't account for players of our style. When attacking enemies, the circle button, which has been up to this point your dodge roll, can now grab and throw enemies, but the range of this grab is a little greater than I would like for it to be. This has led to several occasions where I was just trying to roll backwards and away from an opponent, and I continuously grabbed them instead. And this wouldn't be a big deal if enemies could be killed as quickly as in the other games, but they seemingly take whole QTE sequences to kill now. So you get into situations where you're meleeing an enemy, then you start taking on fire, so you try to back out and roll away, but Nate just decides to start grabbing onto people, and then you die anyway because he won't stop. It's not a huge deal seeing as how there's no real penalty for death, but it's frustrating that the strategy can be so easily overcome. The game is at its best when it's moving you along at a brisk pace in these high energy set pieces, like the train sequence or the brilliant boat sequence. I really can't understate how much fun this part was. These few specific areas in Uncharted 3 were probably my favorite group of shootouts in the series because of the interactivity and options you're given. It reminded me a lot of The Last of Us Part 2's combat in these sections, which is my favorite third-person cover shooter system I've probably ever played with. Sadly, none of the Uncharted games reached the highs that I felt in The Last of Us Part 2, but I also feel that Uncharted outclassed The Last of Us in replay value. The collectibles in the first game aren't hidden very well or anything, but as you go on in the series, they are much more creative on how they're strewn about in the levels. And I guess that's just a good way to look at the series as a whole. Most of the systems and ideas just get better with time. While I think the villains of the series never really find a good footing in any of the adventures, the characters are assuredly at their best in 3. Even if I would like to see them interact with each other more, that has to count for their quality as is. Gunplay gets better, but the cover system defending it never feels as tightly put together as it needs to be. The melee combat really hit the sweet spot for me in Among Thieves, but overstepped the boundaries in Drake's Deception. I really think I want an Uncharted game that focuses more on the characters and not the treasure. Like, of course there has to be something they're after, otherwise it's not really an Uncharted game, but I want a more personal game. And I know the fourth game has a grappling hook, so I'll like it more on principle alone. Maybe you guys can help me. Would I be interested in the fourth Uncharted game? Would I find it to be a better game if the first 3 didn't absolutely wow me? Please let me know in the comments below if you care to. And I don't think I advertise it enough, but you should totally follow myself and the official command prompt on Twitter. Links in the description below. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching, so thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.